Two people chained to stone walls, hungry, thirsty. One a lord, one a lady. Both wanted the same thing, James's touch. "If you choose me," Catherine begged, her voice breaking, "I'll give you freedom." Edmund lifted his head, chains rattling. "She's lying, I already freed you. Choose me." James stood at the door, key in hand, turning it slowly between his fingers. 2 years ago, these two people owned him. Now they belonged to James. But was James evil, or was he simply smart? Subscribe and find out. Because this story will blur the line between victim and villain in ways you never expected. But let's go back. 2 years earlier, spring of 1851. When James first arrived at Willowbrook Plantation, everything was different. Edmund purchased him at a private auction in Charleston, and the auctioneer had whispered something that day. "This slave is different, your lordship. Very different." Edmund understood what he meant. On the purchase papers, there was a note in small handwriting, "Special physical attributes." That night, when Edmund summoned James to his chambers, he discovered why this man had cost 3 times the normal price. And the next morning, Edmund woke up a different man, changed in ways he didn't yet understand, addicted. But it wasn't just Edmund who noticed. Catherine had seen it too, the change in her husband's walk. That look in his eyes, that satisfied expression she'd never seen in 10 years of marriage. And one night, curiosity consumed her. What they didn't know was that James was watching them both, studying them, waiting. Spring 1851, Charleston, South Carolina. Spring in Charleston arrived with suffocating heat that settled over the city like a wet blanket. The harbour waters lay still and grey, reflecting the weathered facades of buildings that had witnessed centuries of human commerce. Magnolia trees bloomed white and fragrant, their beauty masking the rot beneath, the buying and selling of human souls that funded the city's prosperity. The wealthy promenaded on King Street in imported silks, while in the back rooms of certain establishments transactions of a different nature took place. Transactions that required discretion, privacy, understanding between men who shared certain appetites. The auction house on King Street smelled of tobacco, sweat, and desperation. It was the kind of place where the wealthy came to purchase human beings while pretending they were simply making business investments. Lord Edmund Fairfax stood in the back room, away from the main auction floor. He was 53 years old, tall and thin, with grey hair that he kept meticulously groomed. His clothes were expensive, imported from London. Everything about Edmund suggested control, precision, wealth. But inside, Edmund was burning with a secret he'd carried for 30 years. He desired men, not women, never women. His marriage to Catherine had been purely strategic, a requirement of his social position. They hadn't shared a bed in years. She was 25 years younger than him, beautiful in the way society demanded, but Edmund felt nothing when he looked at her. Absolutely nothing. The private dealer, a man named Silas McKinney, led Edmund to a separate room. "I have something special for you, Lord Fairfax," Silas said with a knowing smile. "Just arrived from Virginia. The previous owner sold him because, well, you'll see why. His wife couldn't stop herself." Edmund's heart raced. This was why he came to these private showings. The main auction floor was for field workers. These back rooms were for something else entirely. James stood in the centre of the room, wrists bound, wearing only thin cotton pants. He was 24 years old, 6 feet tall, with smooth bronze skin that seemed to glow in the lamplight. His face was beautiful in a way that transcended gender. High cheekbones, full lips, eyes the colour of honey. His body was lean but muscular, built from years of hard labour. But it wasn't just his face or his physique that made Edmund's breath catch. There was something about the way James held himself. Despite being bound, despite being for sale, there was a quiet dignity in his posture. His eyes were lowered, as was expected, but Edmund could sense intelligence behind them. Calculation. This was not a broken man. This was someone who knew exactly what was happening. "Turn around," Silas commanded. James turned slowly. His back was marked with old scars from whippings, but they were faded. His previous owner hadn't beaten him recently. That was significant. "How much?" asked, his voice steady despite the desire coursing through him. $3,000. Edmund didn't flinch. That was 3 times the normal price for a male slave. But Silas was watching him carefully, waiting for his reaction. "Why so much?" Silas smiled. The previous owner's wife became obsessed. It caused problems. He had to sell him. But before you buy, you should know. This one is different. Very different, if you understand my meaning. Edmund understood perfectly. He'd heard whispers about certain slaves, men who possessed qualities that made them valuable in ways that went beyond labor, men whose presence could drive a household into chaos. "I'll take him," Edmund said, "but I want documentation that he can read and write. That's important to me." Silas raised an eyebrow. "He can. Previous owner educated him. Probably a mistake, but there you go. Makes him worth more to certain buyers." Papers were signed. Money changed hands. By sunset, James belonged to Edmund Fairfax. During the 3-day journey back to Willowbrook Plantation, Edmund didn't speak to James. They rode in the carriage together, Edmund watching this beautiful man from the corner of his eye. James sat perfectly still, hands folded, eyes forward, silent, obedient. But Edmund could feel the intelligence radiating from him. What Edmund didn't know was that James was studying him too, noting every glance, every small movement, every tell. James had learned long ago that survival meant understanding the people who owned you better than they understood themselves. And from the moment Edmund had walked into that room in Charleston, James knew exactly what kind of man he was. Edmund was vulnerable, starving for acceptance. And most importantly, Edmund had a secret that made him weak. James could work with that. What happened on their first night at Willowbrook would change everything. But to understand how James went from property to master, you need to understand who Catherine Fairfax really was. Because she wasn't the innocent lady of the house everyone believed. She had secrets too. Dark ones. And those secrets would make her the perfect victim. Or the perfect accomplice. Even James couldn't be sure which. Willowbrook Plantation, late spring 1851. The mansion stood 3 stories tall, white columns gleaming in the afternoon sun, surrounded by ancient oak trees that provided shade but no comfort. Inside, behind walls that seemed designed to muffle sound, Catherine Ann Whitmore Fairfax lived a life of exquisite imprisonment. Beautiful rooms, fine furniture, silk dresses, and an emptiness that consumed her from the inside out. Catherine Ann Whitmore had married Edmund Fairfax when she was 18 years old. She was now 28, and had spent 10 years in a loveless marriage, sleeping in a separate wing of the mansion, barely speaking to her husband except at public events. She was beautiful in the classical Southern belle style, pale skin, dark hair, green eyes, a figure that made men stare despite themselves. But beauty had become her prison. Society expected her to be demure, obedient, sexually invisible. She was supposed to produce heirs and manage the household and never ever express desire. But Catherine burned with it, sexual hunger that had no outlet. Her husband hadn't touched her in years. She wasn't permitted to take lovers. The scandal would destroy her. So she suffered in silence, spending long nights alone, touching herself and hating the world that had made her this way. She had a lady's maid named Martha who had served her since childhood. Martha was one of the few people who knew the truth about Catherine's marriage. They talked about it in whispers late at night. "He doesn't want you because he doesn't want women," Martha had said once. "Everyone in the slave quarters knows. Lord Fairfax prefers men." Catherine had felt rage at that. Not because her husband desired men, she didn't care about that, but because he got to satisfy his desires while she had to remain untouched. The unfairness of it consumed her. When Edmund returned from Charleston with James, Catherine watched from her bedroom window as they arrived. She saw James step down from the carriage, saw the way Edmund looked at him, and she knew immediately what this purchase meant. Her husband had bought himself a lover. That first night, Catherine couldn't sleep. She knew Edmund had summoned James to his chambers. The master bedroom was in the east wing, far from her rooms, but sound carried in the old house. Around midnight, she heard something. Not loud, but distinct. A rhythmic creaking, then silence. Then a sound that might have been a moan. Catherine felt something twist inside her. Not jealousy of Edmund, she'd stopped caring about him years ago, but jealousy of the fact that he got to have what he wanted while she remained trapped. She wanted to see this James, really see him, understand what made him so special that Edmund would spend $3,000. The next morning, Catherine arranged to tour the slave quarters, something she rarely did. She wanted it to seem natural, so she brought Martha with her, inspecting the cabins and making notes about repairs that were needed. James had been assigned to work in the main house. She found him in the hallway, carrying firewood to Edmund's study. "You're new," she said, stopping him. James set down the wood and bowed his head respectfully. "Yes, ma'am. My name is James." His voice was deep, smooth, educated. That surprised her. Most slaves spoke in rough dialect. This man sounded like he'd been taught proper English. "Look at me," she commanded. James raised his eyes and Catherine felt her breath catch. She'd seen handsome men before. Charleston was full of them, but James was different. There was something in his eyes. Intelligence, yes, but also a kind of knowing, like he could see right through her carefully constructed facade. And his body, even clothed in simple work clothes, she could see the way he was built. Tall, strong, graceful in his movements. "My husband purchased you in Charleston," she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Yes, ma'am. He paid a great deal for you. I'm grateful for his investment, ma'am." Catherine studied him. "Can you read?" "Yes, ma'am." "Right?" "Yes, ma'am." She nodded slowly. "Then you'll work in the library. It needs organizing. Start tomorrow morning." This was a test. She wanted to see him again, in a setting where she could observe him without seeming improper. The library was acceptable. A lady could supervise a slave doing intellectual work without raising suspicions. What Catherine didn't know was that James had planned for this exact moment. He'd seen her watching from the window when he arrived. He'd felt her presence in the hallway before she spoke. And when she commanded him to look at her, he'd made sure she saw exactly what he wanted her to see. The hook was set. Now he just had to wait for her to take the bait. That night in Edmund's chambers, something happened that would seal James's power over the Lord of Willowbrook. Something that would make Edmund dependent in ways he couldn't even understand yet. But first you need to know what kind of man Edmund really was. Because the Edmund Fairfax that society saw was very different from the man behind closed doors. Edmund's chambers one night fell over Willowbrook like a curtain closing on a stage. The house settled into darkness, slaves retreating to their quarters, candles being extinguished one by one. In the master bedroom of the East Wing, Edmund Fairfax sat alone, watching shadows dance on the walls, knowing that tonight everything would change. Tonight he would stop pretending. Tonight he would take what he'd been craving for 30 years. Edmund Fairfax had spent 30 years hiding who he was. He'd been raised in a world where men like him were considered sick, sinful, criminal. He'd watched as boys he'd known at university were exposed and destroyed, reputations ruined, families disgraced, some even imprisoned or worse. So Edmund had learned to bury his desires. He'd married Catherine because that's what was expected. He'd built Willowbrook into a prosperous plantation because work was a distraction. And once every few months he would travel to Charleston and visit a certain house on the edge of the city where men like him could pay for discretion. But purchasing James was different. This wasn't a brief encounter in a rented room. This was bringing his desire into his own home. It was dangerous, reckless. But Edmund couldn't help himself. That first night he summoned James to his chambers an hour after sunset. The room was large, expensively furnished, with a massive 4-poster bed draped in imported fabrics. A fire burned in the hearth. Edmund had dismissed all the other house slaves for the night. James entered and stood by the door, waiting. Edmund was sitting in a leather chair, a glass of bourbon in his hand. He'd had 3 drinks already, trying to calm his nerves. This shouldn't be difficult. He owned this man, could command him to do anything. But Edmund felt like a nervous boy, not a plantation lord. "Close the door," Edmund said. James did. "Come here." James walked forward and stopped a few feet away. He kept his eyes lowered respectfully, but there was no fear in his posture. That was what struck Edmund. Most slaves in this situation would be terrified. James seemed calm, almost expectant. "Do you know why I purchased you?" Edmund asked. "Yes, sir." "Say it." James raised his eyes then, meeting Edmund's gaze directly. "Because you desire men, sir, and you believe I can satisfy that desire." Edmund felt his pulse quicken, the directness of it, the lack of judgment in James's tone. It was intoxicating. "Yes," Edmund whispered, "that's exactly why." What happened next would change everything. Edmund stood and walked to James, reaching out to touch his face. James didn't pull away. Edmund's hand trembled as he traced the line of James's jaw, his neck, his shoulder. "Have you been with men before?" Edmund asked. "My previous owner," James said quietly. "He used me. His wife did too, sometimes together." Edmund's breathing was rapid now. "Did you want them to?" James's eyes met his. "Does it matter, sir?" The question hung in the air, and Edmund realized the horrible truth. It didn't matter to him. He wanted James regardless. That made him no different from any other slave owner who took what they wanted without caring about consent. But then James did something unexpected. He reached up and took Edmund's hand. "Sir," he said softly, "if you want me, you don't have to force me. I'll give myself willingly, but I need you to understand something." "What?" "If we do this, it changes things between us. You'll become dependent on me, on my body, on what I can give you, and once that happens—" James paused, his eyes boring into Edmund's. "Once that happens, you won't be able to let me go." It was a warning, but it sounded like a promise. Edmund should have stopped then, should have recognized the danger, but he was too far gone, too hungry, too desperate for connection. "I don't care," Edmund breathed. "I need this. I need you." James nodded slowly. Then he began to undress. What Edmund experienced that night was beyond anything he'd imagined. James's body was perfect, but it was more than that. James knew exactly how to touch, how to move, how to draw out pleasure until Edmund was gasping, begging, completely lost. And when it was over, when Edmund lay trembling and satisfied in ways he'd never been before, James held him gently and whispered, "You're safe with me, sir. Your secret is safe." Edmund fell asleep in James's arms, feeling, for the first time in his life, like he could breathe. What Edmund didn't see was the small smile on James's face, or the way James's eyes stayed open, watching, calculating. Phase 1 was complete. Over the next 6 months, Edmund became addicted to James in ways that terrified him. But Catherine was watching, and she was starting to understand that her husband had brought something dangerous into their home, something she wanted for herself. The question was, would James let her have him, or was he playing a much deeper game? Fall 1851, winter 1852. Catherine spent weeks watching James work in the library. He organized books with meticulous care, sometimes pausing to read passages, his lips moving slightly as he absorbed the words. She would sit in the corner with her embroidery, pretending to be focused on her work, but really studying this man who had changed her husband so completely. Edmund was different now. He smiled more. He seemed lighter, less burdened. At social events, he actually engaged in conversation instead of standing stiffly by the wall. People commented on it. "Lord Fairfax seems positively rejuvenated," they'd say. Catherine knew why. She heard the sounds from Edmund's chambers several times a week. Her husband was being satisfied in ways she could only imagine. And it made her burn with resentment. One afternoon in November, she was in the library when James reached for a book on a high shelf. His shirt pulled tight across his back and shoulders, revealing the muscled frame beneath. Catherine felt a jolt of pure desire so strong it made her dizzy. "James," she said, her voice shakier than she intended. He turned. "Yes, ma'am?" "Come here." He walked over and stood respectfully before her. Catherine set down her embroidery and looked up at him. This close, she could smell him, soap and clean sweat and something else, something male and intoxicating. "Are you happy here?" she asked. "I'm treated well, ma'am, better than most." "That's not what I asked." James was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm a slave, ma'am. Happiness isn't really part of my situation." Catherine felt a pang of something, guilt, perhaps, or recognition of the fundamental injustice of their positions, but it was quickly overwhelmed by want. "My husband," she began, then stopped. How could she say this? "My husband seems very pleased with your work. I try to serve him well, ma'am." The double meaning hung in the air. Catherine knew that James knew that she knew what was happening in Edmund's chambers. The pretense was exhausting. "I want you to know," Catherine said, standing up so she could look at him more directly, "that I'm not like other plantation wives. I don't faint at scandalous things. I understand that my husband has particular needs, and I understand that you fulfill them." James's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Interest, maybe, or calculation. I would never presume to discuss your husband's private matters, ma'am. Stop. Catherine said, stop pretending. I know, and I don't care. What I do care about is, she took a breath, is that he gets to have what he wants while I remain unfulfilled. Do you understand what I'm saying? I think so, ma'am. Then tell me. Am I correct? James was quiet. Then, you're asking if I understand that you have desires too, that you want to be satisfied the way your husband is being satisfied. Yes, ma'am, I understand. Catherine felt her heart racing. And I'm in no position to deny you anything, ma'am. I'm property. If you command it, I must obey. I don't want obedience, Catherine said, surprising herself with her vehemence. I don't want to force you. I want. She trailed off, not sure how to articulate it. James took a small step closer. You want me to want you, he said quietly. You want it to be real, not just a slave serving his mistress. You want me to desire you the way your husband desires me. Yes, that was exactly it. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at being understood so completely. Can you? She whispered. Can you want me? James looked at her for a long moment, and then he said something that made her entire body flush with heat. Ma'am, I've wanted you since the moment you commanded me to look at you. I've thought about you every night. About what it would be like to touch you, to hear you make sounds that no one else has ever made you make, to show you pleasures you didn't even know existed. Catherine couldn't breathe. Are you lying to me? I could be, James said. I'm very good at lying when I need to be. But ma'am, look at me. Really look. She did, and she saw it in his eyes. Hunger, real, genuine desire. My husband, she managed to say, if he found out. He won't. Not unless you want him to. I'm very good at keeping secrets. Catherine made a decision. Tonight, after midnight, come to my chambers. The blue door in the west wing. James nodded. Yes, ma'am. That night changed everything. Catherine had been touched by men before, her husband in the early days of their marriage, though Edmund had always seemed distracted and uninterested. But what James did to her was completely different. He was attentive in ways she'd never experienced. He took his time, exploring every inch of her body, learning what made her gasp, what made her arch, what made her beg. And when he finally gave her what she was desperate for, the intensity of it was so overwhelming that she actually cried. Afterward, as they lay together in her bed, Catherine said, I understand now why my husband is so different. You're extraordinary. James just smiled. I'm glad I could please you, ma'am. Will you come back tomorrow night? If you command it. I do. I command it every night. I need. She stopped, horrified at how desperate she sounded, but James just stroked her hair gently. I know what you need, and I'll give it to you as long as you want me to. What Catherine didn't know was that James was thinking about the next phase of his plan. He now had both the Lord and Lady of Willowbrook completely dependent on him physically. The addiction was setting in. Now he just needed to make them desperate enough to compete for him. For almost a year, James maintained this impossible balance, satisfying Edmund and Catherine while keeping them separate. But jealousy is a powerful thing. And eventually, they would both start to realize they were sharing the same man. When that happened, James would need to be ready, because the trap he was setting required them to destroy each other and themselves. Spring 1852, winter 1853. James had created a routine that required perfect precision. He spent 3 nights a week in Edmund's chambers, 2 nights in Catherine's, and 2 nights in his own small room in the slave quarters, where he could rest and plan. Edmund believed he had exclusive access to James. Catherine believed the same. James made sure each of them felt special, chosen, unique in his affections. He studied them both obsessively, learning their vulnerabilities, their fears, their deepest desires. With Edmund, James played the role of the caring, devoted lover. Edmund craved tenderness. He'd spent so many years hiding his true self that having someone who accepted him was intoxicating. James would hold him after their encounters, let Edmund talk about his fears and frustrations, offer quiet reassurance. Edmund became emotionally dependent in ways that went far beyond physical desire. With Catherine, James played a different role. She needed passion, intensity, the feeling of being completely consumed by desire. James gave her that. He was rougher with her, more commanding, making her feel like a woman instead of a delicate lady. Catherine became addicted to the way he made her feel, powerful and powerless at the same time. But maintaining this balance was exhausting, and James knew it couldn't last forever. Eventually, one of them would find out about the other. The question was how to control when and how that revelation happened. James had been planning his next move for months. He needed both Edmund and Catherine to become so obsessed with him that they would do anything, sacrifice anything, to keep him. And the way to do that was to introduce competition. In November of 1852, James made his first strategic move. He began deliberately creating distance, arriving late to Edmund's summons, seeming distracted during intimate moments with Catherine. Both of them noticed immediately. Then came the catalyst. In December, Catherine made a decision that would accelerate everything. She was burning with jealousy, suspecting but not confirming that Edmund was the reason James seemed unavailable. She wanted to make James jealous, make him realize what he would lose if he didn't choose her. Catherine went to Charleston and purchased a new house slave. His name was Marcus, 22 years old, tall, muscular, with striking features. Catherine paid an exorbitant price for him, specifically choosing someone who was undeniably handsome, someone who could serve as a threat. When Marcus arrived at Willowbrook, Catherine made sure James saw him. She positioned Marcus to work in the main house, assigned him tasks that would put him in James's path, and then she waited. One afternoon in late December, Catherine summoned Marcus to her chambers. She left her door slightly ajar, just enough that sound would carry to the hallway where James was working. What happened next was theatre, pure and calculated. Catherine's voice rose in pleasure, loud enough to be heard through the crack in the door. The rhythmic sounds of intimacy, her breathless words, "Yes, just like that, you're so." James, passing in the hallway with fresh linens, stopped. His jaw tightened. For the first time since arriving at Willowbrook, his careful mask slipped. Jealousy flashed across his face, raw and undeniable. He set down the linens and walked directly to Catherine's door. Without knocking, he pushed it open. Catherine was in bed with Marcus, exactly as James had heard. But when she saw James in the doorway, her eyes lit with triumph. This was what she wanted, to see him lose control. "Get out," James said to Marcus, his voice low and dangerous. Marcus looked at Catherine, confused. "Ma'am, you heard him," Catherine said, her voice breathless. "Go to the corner. Watch. I want you to see what real passion looks like." Marcus, terrified and confused, moved to the corner of the room. And then James crossed to the bed, grabbed Catherine, and what happened next was explosive, intense, passionate in ways that made Marcus turn away, embarrassed. When it was over, Catherine lay trembling, tears of satisfaction streaming down her face. James leaned close to her ear and whispered, "If you ever try to make me jealous again, I'll leave. Forever. Do you understand?" "Yes," she gasped. "Yes, I'm sorry. I just needed to know you wanted me." James left the room without looking at Marcus, but something had shifted. Catherine had seen him lose control. She'd seen proof that he felt something real for her. What Catherine didn't know was that James had wanted her to do exactly this. He'd been slowly withdrawing, knowing she would react. The jealousy she'd provoked in him was real, but he'd let it show deliberately. Because now Catherine believed she had power over him, believed she could manipulate his emotions. It was exactly what he needed her to believe. But Edmund had heard about Marcus. The house slaves talked, and word reached him that Catherine had purchased a strikingly handsome young man. Edmund's paranoia exploded, but Edmund had heard about Marcus. The house slaves talked, and word reached him that Catherine had purchased a strikingly handsome young man. Edmund's paranoia exploded. That night, when James came to his chambers, Edmund confronted him immediately. "What's wrong?" James asked, immediately sensing the tension. "Who is Marcus?" Edmund demanded. James paused as if considering whether to tell the truth. "Then your wife's distraction. She purchased him to make me jealous." "Did it work?" James looked at Edmund steadily. "Yes, it did. I hate that it did, but yes." Edmund's face went pale. "You have feelings for her." "I have feelings for both of you," James said carefully. "That's the problem. The seed of suspicion had been planted. The careful balance James had maintained was beginning to fracture, exactly as planned." Over the next few weeks, both Edmund and Catherine started paying closer attention. Edmund noticed that James wasn't always in his quarters at night. Catherine noticed that James sometimes smelled faintly of men's cologne, Edmund's cologne. The tension in Willowbrook Manor grew thick. Edmund and Catherine, who had barely spoken to each other for years, suddenly started having conversations. Tense, careful conversations where they circled around the truth without quite naming it. James watched this all unfold with satisfaction, but he knew the real test was coming. He needed to push them further, make them confrontational, make them compete. In January of 1853, James began deliberately creating scheduling conflicts. He would accept Edmund's summons, then arrive late because Catherine had needed his assistance. He would promise Catherine his time, then seem distracted and tired because Edmund had kept him working through the night. Both of them started to suspect, but neither wanted to voice their suspicions because doing so would mean admitting what they were doing. The breaking point came on a cold February night. Edmund had summoned James to his chambers, but James didn't arrive. After an hour of waiting, Edmund went looking for him. He found James's room in the slave quarters empty. Edmund's heart was pounding as he searched the dark house, and then he heard it, coming from Catherine's wing, sounds that he recognized intimately because he'd heard James make them in his own bed. But there was something else, another voice, Marcus. Edmund stood outside Catherine's door, shaking with rage and betrayal, listening to what was happening inside. It wasn't just James and Catherine. Marcus was there too. Catherine's voice rang out clearly. "Watch, Marcus. Watch and learn what I need, what he gives me." Edmund burst through the door. The scene before him was exactly what he'd feared. Catherine and James in bed together, their bodies intertwined. Marcus stood in the corner, eyes wide, clearly uncomfortable but unable to leave without permission. For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke. Then Edmund said, in a voice shaking with fury, "Get away from my wife." But Catherine laughed, actually laughed. "Your wife? Edmund, you haven't touched me in 8 years. You don't get to claim me now." "He's mine," Edmund said, and the desperation in his voice was naked and raw. "I bought him. He belongs to me." "He belongs to no one," Catherine said, sitting up and wrapping the sheet around herself. "He's a person, Edmund, not property." "He is literally property," Edmund shouted. "I own him. I have the papers. And who the hell is this?" He pointed at Marcus. "My insurance policy," Catherine said coldly. "I bought him to remind James what he could lose if he didn't choose me, and it worked." Edmund's eyes went to James, then to Marcus, then back to Catherine. Understanding dawned on his face, the full scope of what had been happening, the manipulation, the competition, the lies. "Both of you," he said to Marcus and James, his voice deadly quiet. "Catherine's chambers, now." James, who had been silent through this entire exchange, finally spoke. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "we should all have a conversation, a truthful one." Edmund turned on him. "You've been playing us, both of us, this whole time." "Yes," James said simply, "I have." The honesty of it seemed to shock both Edmund and Catherine into silence. "Why?" Catherine asked. James stood, completely unself-conscious. "Because I'm not property. I'm a human being who was stolen from his family, sold like an animal and forced to use my body to survive. So yes, I played you, both of you. I gave you what you were desperate for, what you craved, and I used that to gain power over you. Is that wrong? Perhaps, but it was necessary." Edmund's face was red with rage. "Catherine, you will go to the basement, now. James, take her." Catherine's eyes widened. "What? Edmund, you can't. Take her," Edmund commanded James. "Hold her. Take her to the basement, now." James hesitated. The moment stretched. Everyone in the room held their breath. Then James moved to Catherine and took her arm. She struggled. "James, no! Don't do this! You love me! Tell him!" But James led her out of the room, down the stairs to the basement. Edmund followed, and Marcus, terrified, came too. None of them knew what else to do. The basement room was cold and dark. Edmund had prepared chains mounted to the walls, originally intended for disciplining slaves, though he'd never used them. Until now. "Chain her," Edmund commanded. James looked at Catherine, then at Edmund. "Sir, do it, or I'll have you whipped until you can't stand." James chained Catherine to the wall. She was crying now, begging. "James, please, don't let him do this." Once she was secured, Edmund turned to James. "Now, tell me the truth. Have you been sleeping with my wife?" James could have lied, should have lied, but instead he said, She forced me to, sir. She threatened to have me sold if I didn't comply. Her desires, I had no choice." Edmund's expression changed, softened. "Of course, your beauty, any woman would want you, even my wife." He turned to Catherine. "You forced him. You abused your position." "That's not true," Catherine screamed. "James, tell him the truth. You wanted me. You said you loved me." But James moved closer to Edmund. "Sir, I only ever wanted to serve you. She made me betray you. I'm sorry." And then, right there in front of Catherine, James kissed Edmund. Not a gentle kiss, a passionate, desperate one. Edmund responded immediately, pulling James close. Catherine's screams echoed off the stone walls, because what she was witnessing made no sense. James had been her lover, her passionate, desperate lover. But here he was, kissing Edmund with the same intensity, and Edmund was kissing back in ways that suggested this was not new, not forced. When they pulled apart, Edmund was breathing hard. "You see, Catherine, he doesn't want you. He never did. He's mine. He's always been mine." "That's impossible," Catherine whispered. "He was, in my bed. He was passionate. He loved me. He's an excellent actor," Edmund said coldly. "But his heart belongs to me, doesn't it, James?" "Yes, sir," James said, looking at Edmund with apparent devotion. Then he turned to Catherine and smiled, a small, cruel smile that made her blood run cold. She'd been played completely. "You'll stay here," Edmund said to Catherine, "until you understand your place. James, come. We have things to discuss. Marcus, you stay here with her. Make sure she doesn't escape." They left. Catherine hung from her chains, sobbing. Marcus stood in the corner, terrified and confused. But what Catherine didn't know, what Edmund didn't know, was that this was exactly what James had planned. He'd orchestrated every move, every betrayal, every moment of jealousy. And now came the real trap, the one that would give him complete control over both of them. What happened over the next month would push Edmund and Catherine to the breaking point. James had a plan, a brilliant, ruthless plan, that would give him everything he wanted. But it required both of them to surrender completely, to give up their pride, their dignity, their very sense of self. None of them knew it yet, but that night in the basement was just the beginning. March 1853. What happened that night was the beginning of James's masterpiece. After leaving Catherine chained in the basement with Marcus standing guard, Edmund took James back to his chambers. "I need you," Edmund breathed, pulling James close. "I need to erase what I saw. Her hands on you. I need." And James gave him exactly what he needed. For 2 hours, Edmund lost himself completely. When it was over, he lay trembling, satisfied in ways that made him forget, temporarily, that his wife was chained in the basement. But James wasn't finished. "Sir," he said quietly, "we have a problem." "What problem?" "Your wife knows about us now. She'll tell people. She'll destroy you." Edmund's face went pale. "She wouldn't. The scandal would destroy her too. She's desperate enough and angry enough." James paused. Unless what? "Unless we make her dependent on us, the way you're dependent on me." Edmund looked at him, confused. "I don't understand." "I think you do, sir. You felt it tonight. The jealousy, the rage, but also the excitement. Seeing me with her, knowing I'd come back to you. It made it more intense, didn't it?" Edmund didn't want to admit it, but it was true. The jealousy had fueled something dark and powerful in him. Over the next 3 days, James visited the basement alone. Catherine was still chained. Marcus had been sent away, dismissed from the property entirely, paid off to keep quiet about what he'd witnessed. On the first visit, James brought food and water. Catherine spat at him. "You lied to me. You made me think you loved me." "I never said I loved you," James replied calmly. "I said I wanted you, and I did. I do. But I also want him." "That's disgusting. Or is it just honest? You wanted me even though you're married." "Edmund wanted me even though society says it's wrong. Why is it different for me to want both of you?" Catherine had no answer for that. On the second visit, James brought something else, a small vial of liquid. He mixed it into her water. "This will help with the pain. From the chains." It wasn't just pain medicine. It was the same compounds he'd been giving Edmund, opiates mixed with aphrodisiacs, carefully calibrated to create dependency. On the third visit, Catherine's resistance was already weakening. The drugs were working. Her body ached for relief, for touch, for James. "Please," she whispered, "please touch me. I'm going insane down here." "I will." James said. "But first, you need to understand something. Edmund and I are going to come down here together, and you're going to accept that. You're going to accept me with him the way he's going to accept me with you. Never. Then you'll stay chained forever, until you die of thirst or hunger or madness, your choice." He left her there, desperate and alone. That night, James went to Edmund with a proposal. "Sir, I have an idea, one that will solve all our problems." "Tell me." "We bring your wife back upstairs, but not as your wife, as our companion. We share her, we share each other, a private arrangement that no one else ever has to know about." Edmund's first instinct was revulsion. But as James explained it, as James touched him, manipulated him, reminded him of how good it felt to give in to forbidden desires, Edmund's resistance crumbled. "And she'll agree to this?" "She will, because I've been preparing her, and because deep down she wants this too. She wants to be wanted by both of us." It took another week, but eventually Edmund agreed. They went to the basement together, Edmund and James, and when Catherine saw them standing side by side, she knew her fate was sealed. "We're going to play a game," James said to both of them. "Edmund, you're going to pretend to be my prisoner. Catherine, you're going to believe you're being rescued. And in the process, both of you are going to reveal your true selves." Edmund didn't fully understand, but he trusted James enough by this point to go along with it. Catherine, desperate and drug-dependent, would have agreed to anything. James staged it perfectly. He came to Catherine's chains with a key. "Your husband," he whispered urgently. "He's insane. He's been keeping me captive too, but I escaped. I'm going to free you, and we'll run away together." Catherine's eyes filled with tears of relief and love. "I knew it. I knew you loved me. But first," James said, "we need to secure Edmund. Make sure he can't follow us. Can you help me?" "Yes, anything." James went to get Edmund, telling him, "Sir, we're going to let Catherine think she's escaping. It will make her desperate, vulnerable. Then we'll reveal the truth. Trust me." Edmund, drugged and dependent, agreed. They brought Edmund to the basement room. James made a show of overpowering him, with Catherine helping. They chained Edmund to the wall, the same chains Catherine had worn. Edmund had a gag in his mouth, supposedly to keep him quiet. But really, it was so he could witness what happened next without being able to stop it. Once Edmund was secured, Catherine turned to James with desperate need. "Now, please, I need you so much. It's been days." And James gave her what she wanted. Right there in front of Edmund's eyes. But this time it was different. This time James made sure Edmund could see everything. Every touch, every kiss, every moment of Catherine's pleasure. Catherine was lost in it, crying out with abandon, completely unaware that her husband was watching with growing horror and, despite himself, growing arousal. The encounter lasted over an hour. Catherine experienced pleasure so intense she actually screamed. And through it all, James would occasionally glance at Edmund, holding eye contact, a slight smile playing on his lips. When it was over, Catherine lay trembling and satisfied. "Take me away from here, please. Let's leave tonight." James kissed her forehead tenderly. "Soon, my love, soon." Then he stood and walked to the door. Catherine called after him. "Where are you going?" "To get supplies, for our journey. I'll be back." "Wait, unchain me first." "I can't. If you're unchained and Edmund's guards find you, they'll know you were trying to escape. Safer if you stay here until I return. I'll be quick, I promise." James left. The door closed, and Catherine was left alone in the dark basement, with Edmund still chained to the opposite wall, gagged, but very much aware. She couldn't see him in the darkness, didn't realize he was there. She just lay there, talking to herself. "He loves me. He's going to save me. We're going to be free." Edmund's fury was absolute, but so was his helplessness. James didn't return for 2 days. By the time he came back, both Edmund and Catherine were broken, thirsty, hungry, desperate. Catherine had finally realized Edmund was there. His breathing had given him away. At first, she'd felt triumphant. "See what your jealousy has brought you to," she'd taunted. But as the hours passed and James didn't return, her triumph turned to fear. Then terror. Then desperate pleading. "James, please! Come back! I'm sorry! I'll do anything!" When James finally opened that door, both of them nearly wept with relief. He removed Edmund's gag first. Edmund immediately started shouting, "You bastard! You played us! Both of us! You—" "Yes," James interrupted calmly. "I did. And now you both understand something important. Without me, you're nothing. You need me more than you need food, more than water, more than freedom, don't you?" The question hung in the air, and slowly, horribly, both Edmund and Catherine nodded. James went to Catherine's chambers after midnight. She opened the door immediately as if she'd been waiting. "You came," she breathed. "We need to talk," James said, "about your husband." They sat on her bed and James took her hands in his. "Catherine, I need to be honest with you. Edmund is becoming dangerous. He's obsessed with me in ways that aren't healthy. He's threatened to hurt me if I continue seeing you, and I believe he means it." Catherine's face hardened. "I'll divorce him. I have grounds. Divorce takes time, and Edmund has power. He could have me sold before any proceedings even began. I'd be gone and you'd never see me again." Catherine's hands tightened on his. "No, I won't let that happen." "Then there's only one solution," James said. "We need to remove Edmund from the equation." "What do you mean?" "I mean your husband needs to be confined, made powerless, unable to separate us." Catherine stared at him. "Are you suggesting I have my husband committed?" "I'm suggesting that Edmund has become unstable, dangerous, that he's displayed behaviors that warrant concern, and that as his wife you have every right to ensure he receives appropriate care in a private facility, away from Willowbrook. That's—" Catherine paused. "That's actually possible. Edmund has enemies, people who would love to see him brought low, and there are doctors who would sign any papers I needed if paid enough." "Exactly," James said, "and then Willowbrook would be yours. We would be free, together." Catherine looked at him searchingly. "You'd really want that? To be with me? Only me?" "I've wanted that from the beginning," James lied smoothly, "but Edmund had power over both of us. Now we can take that power back." Catherine pulled him close. "Tell me what to do." James explained his plan, a different version than the one he'd told Edmund, but equally elaborate. When he finished, Catherine was nodding. "When do we start?" she asked. "Soon," James said. "Very soon." Over the next 2 weeks, James set his trap. He had convinced both Edmund and Catherine that they were his chosen one, that he was helping them eliminate their rival. Both of them believed they were conspiring with James against the other. The truth was much simpler. James was playing them both, and the endgame was about to begin. Everything came to a head on March 15th, 1853. The night James had been planning for since he first arrived at Willowbrook. The night he would prove once and for all that he was the master, not the slave. But his plan was even more twisted than either Edmund or Catherine could imagine. Because James didn't want to eliminate one of them, he wanted to keep both as his prisoners. Subscribe now, because what happens next is the darkest thing you'll hear all year. March 15th, 1853. James had been secretly adding substances to both Edmund's and Catherine's evening drinks for 2 weeks. Small amounts at first, just enough to make them more suggestible, more emotional, more desperate. The compounds were a mixture of opiates and aphrodisiacs that he'd obtained through connections in Charleston, paid for with money he'd slowly stolen from Edmund's desk over the months. The drugs created a dependency without the victims realizing it. Edmund and Catherine just thought they were becoming more obsessed with James naturally. They didn't realize their brain chemistry was being altered to intensify every feeling, every desire, every need. On the night of March 15th, James summoned both of them to Edmund's study at different times, using forged notes. Catherine arrived first, believing James had urgent news about Edmund's instability. Edmund arrived 10 minutes later, believing James had evidence of Catherine's dangerous behavior. When Edmund walked in and saw Catherine already there, both of them froze. "What is this?" Edmund demanded. "James, what's going on?" James stood between them, calm and controlled. "This is a conversation we should have had months ago. An honest one. Sit down, both of you." Something in his tone made them obey. They sat in chairs facing each other, with James standing between them. "For the past 2 weeks," James said, "each of you has believed you were conspiring with me against the other. Edmund, you thought we were going to have Catherine committed. Catherine, you thought we were going to have Edmund institutionalized. But the truth is simpler. I've been lying to both of you." The shock on their faces was almost comical. "You see," James continued, "I realized something months ago. You're both addicted to me. Physically, emotionally, psychologically. You need me more than you've ever needed anything. And that gives me power. Real power. The kind of power that means I don't have to choose between you. What are you saying? Catherine whispered. I'm saying that I'm done being property. From tonight forward, we're going to have a new arrangement, one where I'm in control. Edmund stood up. You're insane. I'll have you. You'll have me what? James interrupted. Whipped, sold, killed. We both know you can't do any of those things, because you need me. Your body craves mine. The drugs I've been giving you have ensured that, and now you're so dependent that being without me causes you physical pain. Edmund's face went pale. Drugs? What drugs? The compounds in your evening brandy, in Catherine's wine. Nothing dangerous, just enhancers to make sure your addiction to me became complete. Catherine's hand went to her throat. You've been poisoning us? Not poison. Medicine. To cure your delusions of power. James smiled. Now, here's what's going to happen. Tonight, both of you are going to the basement. There's a room down there that I've been preparing. It's comfortable. There's a bed, chairs, water. You'll stay there for a while. Together. Until you understand your new positions in this household. You're mad, Edmund said. We'll never agree to this. You will, James said, because if you don't, I'll withhold myself from you. Completely. And after 2 weeks of the compounds I've been giving you, the withdrawal will be agonizing. Sweats, shakes, hallucinations. You'll feel like you're dying, and the only cure is me. He let that sink in for a moment, then continued. But if you cooperate, if you accept your new roles, I'll take care of you. I'll satisfy you. Both of you. Isn't that what you want? To have me? Well, now you can. You just have to share and submit. Catherine was crying now. James, please. I love you. Don't do this. You love what I make you feel, James corrected. There's a difference. Now come. Let's go to the basement. Willingly, or I can call some of the field workers I've been cultivating relationships with, men who would be happy to help me for the promise of better treatment. Edmund looked at Catherine. Catherine looked at Edmund. And in that moment, they both realized they were trapped. Completely and utterly trapped. They walked to the basement without resistance. James had indeed prepared a room, thick stone walls, a heavy door with a lock on the outside, a bed, some furniture, basic necessities. It looked almost like a comfortable prison cell. Inside, James said. They entered, and before either could react, James had closed the door and locked it. Through the small barred window in the door, James said, I'll bring you food and water tomorrow, and then we'll begin your education. You're going to learn what it means to be property, to be owned, to beg for mercy and receive it only when it pleases me, the way I've had to live for the past 2 years. James, Edmund shouted, grabbing the bars. James, please, I need you. Don't leave me like this. I'll be back, James said, when I'm ready. He walked away, leaving them in the darkness. And for the first time in his life, James was free. What James did to Edmund and Catherine over the next month was psychological warfare of the most sophisticated kind. He was breaking them down, rebuilding them, making them completely dependent on his mercy. But there was one thing James hadn't counted on. Edmund and Catherine, trapped together, would finally start to understand each other. And when they did, they might find a way to turn the tables, or destroy each other trying. March 16th, April 15th, 1853. The first day in the basement was the worst for both Edmund and Catherine. The drug withdrawal began within hours. Sweating, shaking, nausea. But worse than the physical symptoms was the psychological torment. They were trapped together, two people who had barely spoken in years, now forced into intimacy. At first they blamed each other. Edmund accused Catherine of seducing James. Catherine accused Edmund of buying him in the first place. They screamed at each other until their voices were hoarse. James didn't come that first day, or the second. By the third day, both of them were desperate, not just for relief from withdrawal, but for human contact, for hope. When James finally appeared on the third evening, bringing food and water, both of them rushed to the door. Please, Edmund begged. Please, James, I'm sorry. Whatever you want, I'll do it. Just, please touch me. Let me out, Catherine cried. James, I'll give you anything. Freedom, money, whatever you want. Just let me out of here. James set the tray down and looked at them through the bars. Do you understand now? What it feels like to be powerless? To have someone control whether you eat, whether you're touched, whether you're shown any mercy at all? Yes, they said in unison. Good. That's the first step. James unlocked the door and entered. Both Edmund and Catherine moved toward him, but he held up a hand. Stop! You don't get to touch me until you've earned it. Sit on the bed, both of you. They obeyed. James stood before them, examining them like a slave trader examining merchandise. The reversal was deliberate and obvious. Here are the new rules, James said. You will address me as Sir. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will accept whatever I give you, food, water, touch, or nothing, with gratitude. Do you understand? Yes, Edmund whispered. Yes, what? Yes, sir. Catherine nodded. Yes, sir. Better. James moved closer. Now, you've both been without me for 3 days, and I imagine you're both desperate. The question is, who deserves my attention more? Edmund, make your case. Edmund looked up at him, tears streaming down his face. I've given you everything. Wealth, comfort, protection. I've risked my reputation for you. Please, sir. Please. James turned to Catherine. And you? Catherine's voice broke. I loved you. I still love you. Doesn't that count for something? Love, James repeated. What a fascinating concept. Edmund, do you love Catherine? No, Edmund said without hesitation. Catherine, do you love Edmund? I did once. Not anymore. Interesting. James sat between them on the bed. So you're both in love with me, but not with each other. That's going to be a problem, because from now on you're a package deal. I don't come to one without the other. If I touch Edmund, Catherine will be there watching. If I touch Catherine, Edmund will witness it. Your jealousy, your competition, that's over. You're equals now. Equally powerless. Equally mine. The look of horror on both their faces was exactly what James wanted to see. No, Edmund said. I can't watch you with her. Then you get nothing, James said simply. He stood up and walked toward the door. Wait, Catherine called. Wait, I'll do it. I'll accept those terms. Please don't leave us again. James paused. Edmund? Edmund was silent for a long moment, then quietly, Yes, I agree. Good. James returned to them. Then let's begin your education. What happened over the next month was a systematic breaking of both Edmund's and Catherine's wills. James used every psychological technique he'd learned over years of observation and manipulation. He would give affection to one while ignoring the other, creating desperate competition. Then he would reverse it suddenly, keeping them off balance. He would be tender one day, cruel the next. He created an environment where they never knew what to expect, which made them hyper-focused on his every mood. The drugs in their food continued, carefully calibrated to maintain their physical dependence without causing obvious harm. Their bodies craved him at a cellular level now. But something unexpected began to happen. In their shared misery, Edmund and Catherine started talking. Really talking, for the first time in their marriage. They shared their fears, their regrets, their understanding that they'd both been victims of a society that had denied them their true selves. Edmund talked about the loneliness of hiding his desires for 30 years. Catherine talked about the suffocating restrictions placed on women, the denial of their sexuality. They found common ground in their oppression, and slowly they began to form a plan. James noticed the change. They were too cooperative, too agreeable. Something was shifting, but he was confident in his control. After all, they were completely dependent on him now. What could they possibly do? On April 10th, James made a mistake. He'd been so focused on psychological control that he'd neglected physical security. When he entered their room that night, Edmund was waiting by the door. Edmund grabbed him, using strength born of desperation. Catherine rushed forward with the pillowcase they'd been tearing into strips, fashioning makeshift ropes. I'm sorry, Edmund gasped as they wrestled James to the ground. I'm so sorry. But we can't live like this anymore. They managed to tie James's hands behind his back. Not well, but well enough. Then they took the key from his pocket and locked him in the room while they escaped. James lay on the floor, breathing hard, a smile spreading across his face. They'd done exactly what he wanted them to do. Edmund and Catherine thought they'd won, thought they'd escaped. But James had planned for this. Every move they'd made was one he'd anticipated, because the real trap wasn't the basement room, It was the dependency he'd created in their minds and bodies, and that trap was about to snap shut in the most devastating way possible. April 10th, 16th. 1853, Edmund and Catherine ran up the basement stairs and into the main house, their hearts pounding. They were free, finally free of James's control. "We need to leave," Catherine said. "Get to Charleston. Tell the authorities what he did to us." But Edmund had stopped, leaning against the wall. He was sweating heavily, shaking. "I can't," he gasped. "Catherine, I need him. My body, it's like I'm dying." Catherine felt it too, the desperate craving. The physical need that went beyond want into something that felt like survival necessity. The drugs James had been giving them had created a dependency that was now screaming for satisfaction. "We'll go to a doctor," Catherine said, trying to sound confident. "We'll tell them we were poisoned. They can help us." But could they? Could they explain to a doctor that they'd been drugged by their slave as part of an elaborate scheme of sexual control? The scandal would destroy them both. They stumbled to Edmund's study, trying to think. That's when they heard it. Footsteps on the stairs. Calm, measured footsteps. James appeared in the doorway, hands free. The ropes lay discarded on the floor behind him. He'd untied himself within minutes. "You let me escape," Edmund realized. "You wanted us to get out." "Of course," James said. "I needed you to feel hope, to believe you could be free of me, because now you're going to realize something important. You can never be free of me." "Not really. Your bodies need me. Your minds are conditioned to crave my approval. You could run all the way to Charleston, but within a day you'd be back here, begging me to take you back." "You're insane," Catherine whispered. "No, I'm methodical. You see, I've been planning this moment since the day I was purchased. Every touch, every word, every gesture was designed to create this exact scenario, where you would be so completely dependent on me that you'd choose captivity over freedom." Edmund sank into a chair, defeated. "Why? Why do this to us?" James's expression hardened. "Because you bought me like an animal. Because you used my body for your pleasure without caring about my humanity. Because you're plantation owners who built your wealth on the suffering of people like me. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences? Did you think I'd just accept my fate?" "So this is revenge," Catherine said. "No, revenge would be killing you. This is justice. You wanted to own me? Fine. But now I own you. Completely. And you'll live the rest of your lives knowing that you chose this. That you gave yourselves to me willingly again and again, until you couldn't imagine life without me." Edmund looked up at him with tears streaming down his face. "What happens now?" "Now," James said, "you go back to the basement. Together. And you wait for me to decide when you've earned my mercy. It might be hours. It might be days. But eventually, I'll come to you. And when I do, you'll both be so grateful, so desperate that you'll do anything I ask, and we'll begin again." "No," Catherine said, trying to summon defiance. "We won't. We'll fight you." "Will you?" James walked over to Edmund and placed a hand on his shoulder. The effect was immediate. Edmund gasped and leaned into the touch like a man dying of thirst being offered water. "Look at him, Catherine. Look at how much he needs this. Needs me. You're the same way. You just haven't admitted it yet." He was right. Catherine could feel it. The desperate craving that made rational thought almost impossible. "I hate you," she whispered. "No, you don't. You hate yourself for wanting me. There's a difference." James removed his hand from Edmund, and Edmund actually whimpered at the loss. "Now go. Back to your room. I'll be down later, maybe." Edmund and Catherine walked back to the basement like condemned prisoners. They didn't try to run, didn't try to fight. They simply returned to their cell because the alternative, being without James, was worse than captivity. James locked the door behind them and smiled. Phase 1 complete. Now came the interesting part. Over the next week, James implemented the final stage of his plan. He visited them 3 times a day, but rarely at predictable intervals. Sometimes he would stay for hours, giving them attention and affection until they were trembling with relief. Other times he would simply drop off food and leave immediately, deaf to their pleas. He began training them through classical conditioning. When they addressed him properly as Sir and showed proper deference, he rewarded them with touch. When they showed defiance or argued with each other, he withdrew completely. Within days, they'd learned to compete for his approval by being the most obedient. But the truly diabolical part of James's plan wasn't the behavioral conditioning. It was the emotional manipulation. He began to play them against each other in subtle ways. "Edmund," he would say, "Catherine told me something interesting. She said you're the reason she's trapped here, that if you hadn't bought me in the first place, none of this would have happened." It was a lie. Catherine had said no such thing, but Edmund believed it, and his resentment of Catherine grew. "Catherine," James would whisper later, "Edmund thinks you're weak. He says you'll break before he does, that you'll beg me to let you out while he stays strong." Another lie, but it worked. Catherine became determined to prove she was stronger than her husband. James was fracturing their fragile alliance, making them see each other as obstacles rather than allies. And it was working beautifully. By April 16th, 1 month after being locked in the basement, Edmund and Catherine were no longer the same people. They had been broken down and rebuilt according to James's design. They fought each other for his attention. They debased themselves for his approval. They had accepted their new reality completely. That night, James entered their room and found them waiting on the bed, properly positioned, eyes lowered respectfully. "Good evening," he said. "Good evening, sir," they responded in unison. "I've been thinking," James said, sitting between them, "that it's time to discuss the long-term arrangement. You see, I have no intention of keeping you locked down here forever. That would be impractical, but I also can't simply let you return to your normal lives. So here's what's going to happen." He explained his plan. Edmund and Catherine would be released from the basement. They would return to managing Willowbrook Plantation, but under James's supervision. James would move into the main house, into the master bedroom. Edmund and Catherine would share a room in the west wing. The plantation would continue to operate normally from the outside, but inside everyone would understand the new power dynamic. James would be the true master of Willowbrook. Edmund and Catherine would be his companions, his property. Any deviation from this arrangement, James said, and I disappear forever. And you'll spend the rest of your lives craving something you can never have again. Do you understand? "Yes, sir," they said. "Do you accept these terms?" They looked at each other. What choice did they have? James had won, completely. "Yes, sir," Edmund whispered. "Yes, sir," Catherine echoed. James smiled. "Then welcome to your new life." Willowbrook Plantation, summer 1853. To the outside world, Willowbrook Plantation continued to function normally. Lord Edmund Fairfax and Lady Catherine were seen at social events, managing their estate, living their lives. If they seemed a bit more subdued than before, well, people change as they age. What no one knew was the truth behind Willowbrook's walls. James now occupied the master bedroom. Edmund and Catherine shared a smaller room and came to him only when summoned. The other house slaves had noticed the change in dynamic but knew better than to question it. In fact, James had won the loyalty of most of the enslaved people on the plantation by promising better treatment and working conditions. Edmund and Catherine had become docile, obedient versions of their former selves. They still loved James, or thought they did. The drugs were gradually being reduced, but the psychological conditioning remained. They had been transformed from masters into servants, and they had accepted it. James sat in the study one evening, reviewing the plantation's financial records. He had taught himself to manage the accounts over the past months. Soon, he would convince Edmund to sign papers, making him a co-owner, then full owner. It would take time, but James was patient. He thought about his mother, who had been sold away from him when he was 8 years old. His sister, who he'd never seen again after she was purchased by a plantation in Georgia. The years of suffering, of being treated as less than human. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming power. About proving that those who thought they could own other human beings were themselves vulnerable to being owned. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," James said. Edmund and Catherine came in, standing respectfully before the desk. "You summoned us, sir?" Edmund asked. James looked at them, these two people who had once held absolute power over him, and felt a satisfaction deeper than anything physical could provide. "Yes," he said, "I did. Come here." They approached, and James could see the hope in their eyes, the desperate desire to please him, to be chosen. "Who do you belong to?" James asked quietly. You, sir, they answered together. And who am I? Our master, they said. James smiled. That's right. Never forget it. The chains on Willowbrook had been reversed. The master had become the slave. The slaves had become the master. And in the end, everyone had gotten exactly what they deserved. The story of what really happened at Willowbrook Plantation would never be told publicly. Edmund died in 1859, having signed over the entire estate to James in his final years. Catherine lived until 1867, spending her final days in the West Wing, still calling for James even as she took her last breath. James eventually freed all the slaves at Willowbrook and converted it into a school for freedmen after the Civil War. He never married, never had children, and never explained to anyone how he had come to own one of South Carolina's most prominent plantations. But in his private journals discovered decades after his death in 1891, James wrote one line that explained everything. They thought they could own me, but you cannot own what you cannot control. And in the end, I controlled everything. What do you think? Was James a victim who became a monster, or a genius who took back his power? Drop your thoughts below. And if this dark chapter of history made you question everything you thought you knew about power and control, make sure you're subscribed, because there are more untold stories waiting in the shadows. Stories that will make you wonder, who really holds the chains?